Here is another one of these wild cheating stories. One of the wildest stories I have had the privilege of narrating. This husband found out that his wife of 10 years was cheating on him with two men. And to top it off, she had a warrant for back child support in another state. He says, "Where do I begin? I met my wife about 12 years ago at a hockey game. She was there with some of her friends. We actually sat next to each other. That's how it all started. We clicked right away. She lived about 25 minutes from me. After about 2 years of dating, I proposed and she said yes. I work for Spectrum and my wife works as a dental hygienist. I really thought our relationship was strong. We didn't have any issues with money. Our communication was okay. I'm going to say this is where sometimes most of us miss subtle red flags. We had an open phone policy. She had access to my phone and I had access to her phone, but I hardly ever went through her phone. I didn't have a need to. I think that's the way it should be. If you are in a long-term relationship or marriage, you should be able to share each other's phone. Just my opinion. She had friends she hung out with, and I had friends I hung out with. If she went out with her girlfriends, she was always home at a decent hour. She rarely stayed out past 11:30 p.m. At the latest, sometimes it was midnight. I didn't stay out late either. Wife had her stuff together. She paid her own bills, and she never asked me for any money while we were dating. She even bought me a couple of expensive toys. One of them was a router that cost almost $700. I can relate. One of my routers from Netgear was $699. Well, those good times slowly started to change when I noticed she was drinking a little more than usual. Uh-oh. Granted, she would have a glass of wine with her dinner, but she started drinking quite a bit more than usual. When I say more than usual, she was drinking every single day, and she started early in the day. Maybe her drinking habit is something he missed. We started having more arguments about her drinking habit. She apologized for it, and for a while, she cut back quite a bit. She was really making an effort. Well, one night when she went out with her girlfriends, she got so drunk that one of her girlfriends had to drive her home. Luckily for my wife, it was her girlfriend's turn to be the designated driver. I was really upset at her, but I was happy she got home safe. Later that day, while I was at work, my wife called and apologized again. But in the back of my mind, I really didn't think her apology was genuine. Yeah, I'm going to say he missed this red flag. But things didn't get better, they got worse. Fast forward a week, and my wife tells me she is going out with her girlfriends again. We got into a small disagreement, but I didn't press. So that night, while I was making myself something to eat, I realized I needed something from the store. So when I got to the store, I happened to run into one of her girlfriends. I thought to myself, wait, I thought she was hanging out with my wife. Uh-oh, this may not be good. I didn't waste any time. I asked her right away, I thought y'all were hanging out tonight. She says she wasn't, but everybody else in that group was. After talking to her friend, I got what I needed and left, but I tried to FaceTime my wife on the way home, but she didn't answer. Well, I tried to call her a few more times, but she didn't answer my calls, didn't answer my text messages, nothing. Yeah, that's not a good sign. I know some people will say, oh, she's out with her friends. She can't hear her phone. No, he FaceTimed her, he called her, and sent a text message. So he contacted her 3 different ways, and she still doesn't respond? Not a good sign. So at about 4:16 a.m., she comes strolling in the house, but she isn't drunk, which I expected her to be. To my surprise, she was just tired. As I said in previous videos, that's too late to stay out if you have a partner at home. And for me personally, that's highly disrespectful, especially when your partner is trying to reach you and you don't respond. But her being tired didn't stop me from going off on her and asking why she didn't respond to me. Her excuse was her phone died. I told her that was BS because she charged her phone right before she left the house that night. So I had to get ready for work and she went to bed. Apparently, she had already called her boss and called out. For the next week, we barely spoke to each other. I didn't know why. She was distant, standoffish, wouldn't let me touch her, and when I would try to talk to her about things, she really didn't seem like she wanted to talk to me. Throughout her behavioral changes, I mostly kept my cool, only arguing with her about her drinking and coming home late and not responding to me. About a week later, I noticed my wife hadn't come home from her job one night. She is usually home about 6 p.m., but it was about 7:45 p.m., and she had not called me or anything. And again, I called, texted, and FaceTimed. Nothing. Well, I am going to say that those red flags he missed are starting to show themselves. So I got in my car and drove to her job. Her office is closed. I called all her girlfriends, the ones she hangs out with the most, and each of them said they don't know where she is. I went home and just tried to gather my thoughts on what to do next. Shortly after I was able to get my mind straight, I started to do a little digging. I checked our phone bill for anything out of the ordinary, phone calls or text messages to numbers I didn't know. I looked at our latest credit card statement, bank statement for anything that I thought was worth looking at. At about 10:19 p.m., my wife comes strolling in the house, saying she had to work late. When those words came out of her mouth, my heart dropped to my stomach. I knew she was lying, but I didn't trip. I played along. So, the next day when I went to work, I grabbed one of the Spectrum vans we were not using and staked out my wife's job. My wife rolled in about 8:59 a.m., but the strange thing is, she wasn't wearing her work clothes. She was dressed in workout gear. Now, mind you, after seeing all this, my mind is running a million scenarios because she always goes to work in her scrubs. She didn't have a gym membership anywhere that I was aware of. Surprisingly, she was only in her office for about 20 minutes and she came right back out. When she got into her car, she put on a baseball cap. I thought to myself, what the fuck? She never wears any kind of baseball caps. Uh-oh, I think she is going somewhere where she shouldn't be going. Well, I followed my wife to an apartment complex about 15 minutes from her office. Uh-oh, here we go. What happened next is when I thought my cover was blown. When she got out of her car, she looked back at the van, but she couldn't make out who was driving. She just kept walking toward the apartment she was going into. When she knocked on the door, a guy answered the door without a shirt on. They embraced and kissed each other. Yep, she is cheating. Shockingly, I see the blinds of the guy's apartment open up, and my wife is pointing at the van. I told you, this is a wild story. When my wife was pointing at the van, I took off and went straight back to my job. I am surprised I didn't get a speeding ticket, but I am not done. I parked the van in the far corner of the parking lot of my job. About 20 minutes later, my wife shows up while I am helping a customer. My wife knew where I worked, but she has never come to my job. Wow, she wanted to make sure he was at work. That's why she went to his job. I pretended to ask why she was dressed like that and what brought her to my job. She told me she was in the area because she wanted to try out this new coffee shop down the road. That whole ordeal with my wife scared the shit out of me. I wasn't going to follow her anymore. Unfortunately for me, my wife pays attention to her surroundings. Now that I know my wife is cheating on me, my next step was to call a divorce lawyer. My mistake was I didn't get any photos or anything. I really couldn't because of my wife being a watchdog. One thing I know is that in my state, Alabama is a no-fault divorce state, but I can file on fault-based grounds. On my lunch break, I called a few private investigators. One gave me an outrageous price, and another guy gave me a reasonable quote of $5,000, half down and half when finished. I would imagine that he didn't want to take any chances of being caught by his wife if he had chose to follow his wife after the first time. I left work a little early. I met with the private investigator and told him I knew my wife was cheating on me, but I didn't get any proof when I followed her. I told him she met a man at his apartment and they embraced and kissed. I gave him all the information, where she worked, what she wore to work, what kind of car she drove, everything. I got home about a little after 7 that night, and my wife was home already on the patio drinking a beer. I didn't even tell her I was home. I couldn't look at her the same. All I cared about now was what the investigator would come back with. These private investigators are worth it in most cases. Well, the next day, things got even crazier. While I was waiting for the investigator to inform me of his findings, I got a phone call on our home line from a guy that says my wife needs to call him, and he gave me his number. This story gets crazier and crazier. I promptly asked him what this was about. He wouldn't tell me. My wife and I haven't been intimate for about 2 months now, but I never brought it up or made a big stink about it. So for the next 2 weeks, we slept in the same bed without doing anything. Well, another week passed, and the private investigator just showed up at my job and held up a folder. I had one of the guys take over for me and went out to the investigator's car. Well, what he showed me was my wife was cheating on me with 2 men. The one guy, I saw her go into the apartment, and another guy that was an acquaintance of one of her girlfriends. I was blown away. I paid him the other half on the spot and went back inside. Well, things went left for my wife. When I got home from work, there were 2 police officers standing at my door. Turns out my wife owed more than $12,000 in back child support. Oh, wow. How in the hell did he miss this red flag? I don't think she told him about her troubles. That's a lot of money. Well, my wife pulled in after me, and the cops arrested her right on the spot. She was panicking, asking what was going on. I didn't stick around. I went into the house. I ended up calling the number that I was supposed to give to my wife. The guy on the other line was her ex-husband, the one before me. He gave me an earful. He told me that he divorced her because she was cheating on him and got custody of the kids, and she had to pay child support. He also told me she has been married 3 times before me. Wow, this woman has been married 3 times? Damn. Well, make it 4 now. Later that night, she came home. I don't know who bonded her out, or she was let out on her own recognizance, but it wasn't me. She packed some of her clothes and left. Didn't even say a word to me. Wow, good riddance is all I would say. The next morning, the first divorce lawyer I got a hold of went to see her and filed for divorce. About 6 weeks later, my soon-to-be ex-wife was served with divorce papers at her job. Well, guess what? She didn't show, and I was awarded the divorce by default. I am assuming she didn't show up because she had other issues to deal with, and she would have gotten hammered in my opinion. Even though she was a no-show, the judge still gave her time to get the rest of her belongings. This woman never came back to the house. I sent a letter to her job, giving her 30 days to come get her stuff. If she didn't, it would be discarded. Well, I ended up throwing her shit away. Thanks, Tony, for letting me rant. I found your channel a long time ago, and I remember specifically where a guy said your channel helped his son avoid being baby trapped. I never thought this would happen to me. I was so in love with this woman that I didn't pay attention to those red flags. Yep, that'll happen every single time. If you don't pay attention, those red flags will bite you. Until next time.